Therefore strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. Hello, everyone. Recently, in my lectionary reading for morning prayer, I was directed to the 12th chapter of Hebrews and a passage of scripture that has become legendary in the moving about household for all of the wrong reasons, because it includes these two verses. Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. Now, that seems like that would speak to me in my current state for obvious reasons. Which I think become more evident when I read it in the New English Bible, which is what I was reading this week when I came upon it. Hebrews 12 and 13. Come then, stiffen your drooping arms and shaking knees, and keep your steps from wavering. Then the disabled limb will not be put out of joint, but regain its former powers. As I am currently recuperating from some injuries to my limbs, which have left me with limited mobility, you might think that these verses in Hebrews 12 speak to me for that reason, as if they are referring to actual physical limbs, feeble arms, and weak knees. However, that is not the reason why these verses have slipped into moving about family lore as they have. They speak to me because they are illustrative of a problem with me, a few problems with me. One problem with me is that I am somewhat on the spectrum, as it were, and sometimes have difficulty reading the subtext and recognizing sarcasm or irony. And my sense of humor is perhaps set at a different angle. It tilts in a way that is different maybe from your average American adult. And so I have difficulty recognizing sarcasm from time to time. But probably more important, morally speaking, in terms of a problem with me, I have a tendency to hold grudges. And I realize that is a personal fault, but it is in fact the case. So I am going to relay a story that is, or should be, very embarrassing to me, and is embarrassing to me. But it illustrates how I can hold a grudge for decades, and I can disguise that grudge in humor, such that when I recount the events surrounding this grudge, I can make it sound like I'm just telling a funny story. And it is a funny story, and one that I should laugh at, and maybe you will find it humorous as well. When I was a youth, teenager, attending a Nazarene church, this is actually the very Bible I had at that time, a New International Version given to me by my parents. And this is back in a time when I thought it was okay to underline things in pen and actually use highlighter in a Bible. I thought that's what it meant to study the Bible, is to highlight it within an inch of its life. But at our church, the youth had a speaker come to do a sort of weekend revival with the youth. And this is a well-known person among evangelical Christians, and who is still writing. She's an author and speaker still from what I understand, and even recently had a magazine that bore her name. I don't want to speak too much about her because it's not so much about her, but about me, as always. The speaker was a very gifted speaker, and um, after the weekend, had some books available for sale, books that she had written, and I purchased one of these books and took the opportunity to have her sign the book. I can't believe I no longer have that book. I still think I may have it somewhere in a closet or in the shed or some such, um, because I have a hard time believing I would get rid of it. It has become such a part of our family lore. But she signed her name in the book, and she added a scripture reference at the time that she signed it. Now, I need to tell you that as a youth, I was a skinny and awkward and clumsy, undersized fellow. Um, the 96-pound weakling that you hear about was me at that time. I still am relatively slender, but I was nearly skeletal as a teen, and painfully shy, um, or at least extremely introverted. And that's important to the story because the inscription that this speaker signed or put under her name in my book was very clearly Hebrews 12:12, which says, "Therefore strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees." Now, I did not know that verse when I read it immediately after her signing it, but when I arrived home and looked it up, uh, I was somewhat stunned that she would write this, and it became a funny story among my family of origin, and I told my kids this story since they are um, older and they are aware of this story, that this sarcastic speaker poked fun of this poor, feeble, weak, clumsy, awkward, skinny teenager by writing in ink in his book Hebrews 12:12. Now, a couple things about this. The section that this is in Hebrews, God disciplines his son, so it's about receiving discipline. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as sons. We have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of our spirit and live, etc., etc.? No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful later on. However, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Now, skipping forward several decades, my daughter, as a young adult, was subscribed to the magazine that bore this individual's name. So the story came up from time to time for that reason. And I'm not sure whether I should be ashamed to admit this, but I thought it would be funny if I were to write a letter to this individual and ask about that incident, as if this is something that she would remember decades later. But I thought if she were the type of person to make a joke like that, maybe she could clear the thing up, because I did have family members who thought that's not the verse she meant to put. It's clearly a misprint or a misremembering. She wasn't mocking you or making fun of you. To which I said, "Fie." Um, anyway, I actually took that opportunity to write in jest a letter mentioning this episode and how funny I found it, and asking if this was something that she could see herself doing at that time in her ministry and in her career. And this individual actually wrote me back, and probably like a good social worker or psychiatrist would do, assumed that I were completely serious, which was I? Assumed that I was completely serious and responded by saying I would never say something that would be hurtful and insulting to a student, a teenager. Um, Often I would give people the life verse Hebrews 12:1 and 2. So it's possible I wrote 12:1-2 rather than 12:12, which certainly makes sense. Hebrews 12:12 is a life verse for a lot of people. Since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Nice verse. Beautiful verse to write in my book and sign your name to. But I am certain as certain can be that there was no dash between the 1 and the 2. But so I did receive this letter from her, and I thought when I received it, okay, I have officially taken this too far. Um, Time to let it go. This is not a thing. And if it is a thing, I still need to let it go, because this chapter talking about discipline, assuming she had intended to tell me, go home and strengthen your feeble arms and your weak knees, would that have been off base? Could I have benefited from a few push ups and squats, maybe? Spend a little time in the weight room? Would that have been beneficial to me? Yeah, it probably would. Uh, no discipline is fun. If she had written that in my book and intended it to reference my actual feeble arms and shaking weak knees, that would have been an understandable and beneficial bit of advice to me at that age. But likely her explanation of the story is the right one, and she intended to direct me to Hebrews 12:1 and 2. Now, why have I held on to this for all of this time? One, it is a funny story, and my sense of humor is a little off kilter, perhaps, but I thought it was a funny story, and someone who knew me at that age probably would find that funny and ironic. Um, but it speaks to a problem with me that I hung on to it for this amount of time, and as a joke, brought it up to this individual to ask, what did you mean by that 30 years ago? That signifies a problem with me, and something that I need to work on that isn't as simple as doing some push ups or some squats. So, anyway, that went on way longer than it needed to, and I'm probably should be more embarrassed than I am to relate that story. But yeah, it's become part of our small collection of stories in our family. And every time the pastor at our church happens to preach on this passage, um, up and down the pew, we don't really have pews, but the row of chairs, our family can be seen to be glancing at each other with knowing looks and winks as we all think of that speaker whose name I will not mention out of respect for her. Um, but there you go. That's by way of confession. But I am committing to let it go. And thank you, um, ma'am, for your attempt to give some advice to a awkward teenager 30 years ago. I'm maybe finally ready to accept it. Thanks for bearing with this painful confession today. They say it's good for the soul. And hope you'll join me again next time.